Hello, everyone. My name is Emily, and this is the ninth and final episode of the Reading Buddy Book Club for this summer, where we will be finishing Race to the Bottom of the Sea by Lindsay Eagar. I have had so much fun reading with you guys this summer. Before we get started, make sure that you are continuing to read with your reading buddy, and if you would like to follow along with me, feel free, or if you just like to listen, that's okay too. If you still have any crafts or coloring pages, keep working on those. And let's get started. Chapter 28. Dinner at La Fruits de Mer was delectable. Flaky, buttery cheese biscuits, fizzing white grape juice, and the seafood smorgasbord. Fidelia had never seen her aunt put away so much food. "Shall we order another serving of clams?" Aunt Julia asked, after Fidelia had taken what she swore was her final bite of baked octopus. "Are there any left on the island?" Fidelia groaned. Aunt Julia laughed and put in another order. They ate every morsel. When the two of them were stuffed to the gills, they left the restaurant and found an abalone sunset, battling the undertow's gray clouds for supremacy of the sky. The pink was winning at the moment. Aunt Julia put her hand over her heart. "Sometimes I think the darkness almost makes it more beautiful." Fidelia tilted her head. Yes, the undertow did make the brights brighter, the gasps of sunlight louder. A dramatic display, this skirmish between light and dark, life and death. For a split second, Merrick's mismatched eyes flashed through her mind, a dazzling deep blue eye, spilling over with vitality, and the gruesome blackness of the dead one. "Darling?" Aunt Julia touched Fidelia's shoulder. "Are you all right?" Fidelia nodded. "You have that look on your face," Aunt Julia pressed. "I've seen it a few times today." Fidelia sighed. "It's nothing." Then she met Aunt Julia's bespectacled eyes. "Actually," she retracted, "there is something, but I'd rather not talk about it. Not here, not tonight, not after today, the closest thing to a perfect day she'd had in months." Aunt Julia gratefully accepted this, squeezing Fidelia's shoulders briefly. "There's something I would like to talk to you about, regarding our move to the mainland." Fidelia waited, looking at her aunt. "Well, would you be terribly disappointed if we didn't?" Her mouth twitched in the hint of a smile. Fidelia's heart leaped, like a whale breaching the surface. "Really?" "Darling, I can't take you away from here. This is your home. It's in your blood. Your memories live here, and—" She took a deep breath. "It's my home, too. It's where my own memories are, the good ones and the less than good." "We'll make plenty of new ones," Fidelia said, "wherever we decide to be." She meant it. Home wasn't a place. She learned that these last few weeks. It was a feeling, a state of being. It was a person. "Wherever we decide," Aunt Julia echoed, and offered the crook of her arm. Fidelia linked elbows with her aunt, and they walked down the boardwalk. She was having such a good time, she wasn't prepared when they turned the corner and spotted the mint green door of Bon Bon Voyage sweets shop. Fidelia stopped cold. A tidal wave of memories hit her, the taste of choco glomps as the moon rose over the water-warped main deck, a kaleido-rainbow fig munched down between high-rising waves, astro bloomers washed down with a gulp of cold water from a blackjack. "What's wrong?" Aunt Julia searched her niece's face. "What is it?" Fidelia gestured to the door. "Do you think we could pop in for a minute?" she asked. Aunt Julia was unreadable, her expression murky. "You know I don't care much for sweets." "Please, Aunt Julia," Fidelia implored. Aunt Julia pursed her lips. "Oh, all right." Fidelia thought of Merrick's reaction when Cheap Shot Charlie pulled out a knapsack of stolen sweets. Back in the quail house, when Fidelia was first taken captive by them, back when she was still terrified of Merrick the Monstrous. Back before she knew he had a soft center, deep under the layers of stone, a softness that was reached only with a junky metal brooch. When Aunt Julia opened the front door, a string of bells sounded, jarring Fidelia out of her nostalgia and back into reality. One step into Bon Bon Voyage sweet shop, and they were transported into an alternate world, one made of cotton candy clouds and chocolate thunderstorms. The walls were soft pastel pink, textured like spun sugar. Yellow sconces gave the store a lemony glow. Black and white tiles checkered the floor, and as Fidelia walked through the store, a different scent seemed to inhabit each tile: coconut, marzipan, hazelnut. Crystal jars of rainbow-colored candies were in rows along the counters. Fidelia read the labels, remembering every flavor: apple cran truffles, peach cream fizzers, apricot popcorn, choco glomps and crackamella bars, and butter turtles, and jelly jigglers, Aunt Julia read. I haven't had these in ages. Get one of them, Fidelia suggested. Bold, Aunt Julia said. I think I'll just take a sliver of this dark chocolate. Glass shattered behind them. Someone tumbled through the storefront window, knocking over a table of canary cobblers and rolling onto the tiles. Amid the shrieks from the customers and staff, a familiar cough burst from the man as he clambered to his feet. Fidelia's heart stopped. It was Merrick. For a crazy moment, she thought he was a ghost. He looked like he'd dragged himself from the grave. A river of red spittle trailed onto his bare chest. He wore his peacoat over his naked torso. His network of veins was now black, crisscrossing his body like spilled ink. Fidelia waited to feel Aunt Julia's hand digging into her arm, holding her back. But her aunt was frozen to the rack of chocolate bricks, staring at the pirate as if he had crawled out of her nightmares. How? Aunt Julia whispered, her voice trembling. How is it possible? You know the saying, Merrick wheezed. Anything can happen in the undertow. He stumbled forward, strain in every step. A pit opened in Fidelia's stomach. Why? She whispered, her teeth chattering. Why did you come here, of all places, to die? Why are you going to make me watch, after all the death I've already seen, after I already mourned you? Merrick came toward her. Between coughs, he murmured something, a single word, repeating it louder and louder until finally Fidelia could hear it. Jewel, Jewel, Jewel. Walking around Fidelia, he stood close enough to Aunt Julia that the flaps of his greasy peacoat skimmed her crisp white blouse. Jewel, he whispered, lifting one bony hand to her cheek, and Aunt Julia flinched. Before Fidelia could register what she was seeing, the front door blasted open, kicked clean off its hinges. Merrick, you demon! Why won't you die? Admiral Bridgewater stumbled into the sweet shop, aimed his blunderbuss at Merrick, and fired. The bullet missed, ricocheting off the back wall. No! Fidelia shouted. Aunt Julia screamed. The shopkeeper ducked behind the counter, and the remaining customers escaped through the shattered window, disappearing down the street. Someone else ran through the broken door, pistols blazing. Bloody L. Without skipping a beat, she shot at the Admiral, who dove behind a stand of astro bloomers. Blueberry sprinkles flew everywhere. Cheap Shot Charlie hobbled into the sweet shop behind her, dragging his right leg as if it were a tag-along. The leg Merrick had put a bullet into, back when they were ambushed by the Admiral in the tropics. Charlie and Elle, they had made it. They were alive. Joy shot through Fidelia. Only an instant of relief before the Admiral fired a shot that nearly hit Cheap Shot Charlie's neck. Cheap Shot Charlie shot back, missing the Admiral. Captain, the streets are swarming with silver buttons. You have to get out. Not until it's done, Merrick gasped. The next shot from Admiral Bridgewater nearly grazed Cheap Shot Charlie's shoulder. He rolled out of the way, knocking into Bloody L. Both their guns skittered across the checkered floor. Fidelia felt as if she were watching something in slow motion, underwater. Bridgewater's mustache, curling up in a smile, as he leveled his blunderbuss at Merrick. Cheap Shot Charlie and Bloody L struggling to their feet, grappling for their weapons. Then suddenly, Fidelia was moving, free from the range of Aunt Julia's desperate grasp, past the candy aisles, and directly in front of Admiral Bridgewater's gun. Out of my way, girl! Admiral Bridgewater tried to shove her aside with the flare of his gun, but her boots gripped the tile, and she didn't budge. Fidelia, no! Aunt Julia cried. Quail. Merrick immediately doubled over, coughing horribly. I won't. Fidelia's nerves hummed, her chest full of fire. I won't let you die like this. Not when you're so close, she finished in her mind. Not when it's already over for you. Accomplice! Admiral Bridgewater jetted a sausage finger at Fidelia, his blunderbuss shaking with his rage. I warned you, didn't I? I told you everyone who aided Merrick the Monstrous would dangle beside him in the gallows. You already got his treasure, Fidelia said. Now leave him be. The Admiral let out one short laugh, almost a bark. He is the treasure, he said. And with jubilation glowing in his eyes, the Admiral raised his gun and pointed it at the center of her chest. A shot fired, and Fidelia panted, her heart slamming into her ribs. She waited for the pain, the sear of the bullet in her chest, the acrid smell of gunpowder, the blood. But Admiral Bridgewater hadn't shot her. His blunderbuss was still pointed at her, his cheeks still red as snappers. The smoke wafting in the candy store wasn't coming from his weapon. It was coming from the doorway, where Nicu and the other Mulvanian pirates stood clumped together. Nicu's antique silver flintlock pistol was pointing at the ceiling, smoke curling from the end. He lowered it and aimed right at Admiral Bridgewater's head. Drop your weapon, Admiral. Chapter 29. Fidelia's blood was ice, her muscles stone. She had been so concerned with the Mulvanian survival when Merrick left them bobbing in the ocean, but she felt no satisfaction seeing them here. Nicu's guns may have been pointed at the Admiral, but she couldn't imagine the Mulvanians would leave unpunished the pirate captain who tossed them overboard like rotten fish heads. Admiral Bridgewater sneered at Nicu's gun, dropping his own blunderbuss with a clatter. My men will be here any minute, he said. His tricorn hat had fallen off his head. Fidelia thought his head looked very small and sweaty without the 3 corners of black felt to fill it out. How perfect. This will only take a minute, Nicu said. He turned one of his pistols onto Merrick, who clung to the closest candy rack for support, like a bivalve on a rocky shore. I'll ask you only once, the Rasculac captain said. Where is the treasure? Merrick coughed. Ask. He gestured to the Admiral. The effort to speak was too much. Nicu turned his full attention back to Admiral Bridgewater, whose face drained of all color like a pierced vegetable. Confiscated, the Admiral said, untucking his chin and trying very hard to look the part of a dignified royal soldier. It's all in Her Majesty's possession, being accounted for. Razat, Nicu said, stepping closer to the Admiral. Mule's Razat. Where is it? Outside, the rain began to fall in heavy sheets. It's hidden, Admiral Bridgewater said. Hidden from the likes of you or any of your black-hearted cohorts. And there's nothing you can do. I will give you Merrick. Thunder rolled above Bon Bon Voyage sweet shop. The sound of crashing waves echoed along the boardwalk. Give me Merrick? Admiral Bridgewater said. I will let you finish him, Nicu answered. You will tell us where the treasure is, and we will leave him to die at your hands. If he is indeed such a great prize to you, then this is an easy bargain. Merrick coughed. Fidelia's forehead was damp with sweat. She watched the pirate captain bend in half, searching for his next breath, searching. Nicu tensed. Quickly, Admiral, quickly. You don't have much time. He bowed his head slightly toward Merrick. It could happen any second. Admiral Bridgewater twitched his mustache, confused. What the blazes does that mean? Nicu studied the Admiral's blank, flabby face. You mean you don't know? He tipped his head back and laughed. Listen to Merrick's cough. Listen to his inhales. Look at his hands. He's finished, do you understand? He's rub on a wooden leg. Admiral Bridgewater cocked his head, staring at Merrick as the pirate captain wheezed and hacked. Like a slow submersion in cold water, Fidelia watched the realization hit the Admiral. The pollen of the red daisies. Admiral Bridgewater's jowls shimmied as his jaw dropped. Then, yes, NICU said. He's dying. The Mulvanian pirate twirled his gun. So now you will make your choice. Tell me where the treasure is, and Merrick is yours to end, or I blow his head off now, and we still take your treasure. Admiral Bridgewater's top lip quivered in pure madness. He studied Merrick, his face darkening. Through clenched teeth, he finally said, In the hold beneath the lower deck of the flagship, a special chamber just below the bilges. Nicky bowed and tucked his revolvers into his belt. Thank you, Prelipe, and to you, he addressed Merrick. The stars are calling. We will watch you in the skies. He stepped backward until he was out of Bon Bon Voyage's sweet shop, and then he and the other Mulvanian pirates headed down the cobbled street, straight for the mother dog. In an instant, Admiral Bridgewater was back on his feet, blunderbuss in hand. Aimed once again at Fidelia, who still blocked Merrick from the Admiral's fire, though her knees were shaking. Last chance to move, Admiral Bridgewater growled at her. Merrick is mine. After all this time, Merrick rasped between coughs, you'll let the great treasure go just so you can be the one to pull my trigger? Trickles of yellow spit flowed down the Admiral's chin as he spoke. I have been waiting 10 years to kill you, he said. 10 years of chasing you so I could have this moment. His whole body quivered. And to think you almost stole it from me. The Admiral shoved around Fidelia, pushing her to the floor, and placed the flared barrel of his weapon directly on Merrick's bare chest. Merrick pointed at himself with a hardened purple thumb. Pirate, he breathed with a grin. An infuriating grin to the Admiral, Fidelia knew, and she tried to match Merrick's complacency, even as tears gathered in the corners of her eyes. Death for Merrick, at last. Admiral Bridgewater reached into his pouch of powder and shot, and found nothing. The Admiral was out of shot. Merrick chuckled, an awful drowning sound. All that gold, the great pirate sputtered, all these gems, all the wealth from the stories, and you're about to let it go, back into the hands of pirates. Somewhere above the din of the growing storm, a whistle blew. Admiral Bridgewater tilted his head like an old bulldog, the sound of men, now, shouting from the harbor. The mother dog was under siege. The Mulvanian pirates were fighting for the treasure, everything that had been down in the cave. Fidelia, Aunt Julia, the pirates, they all watched Admiral Bridgewater survey Merrick with fury, then disgust, then mere annoyance. Rot in hell, he said, and spat on Merrick. He ran out of the sweet shop, chasing after his treasure. Along the boardwalk, a bell rang. The constable had been alerted. Any second, they would cruise down the canal in their patrol boats and investigate. Captain, Cheap Shot Charlie's deep voice trembled. He and Bloody Al took a step toward the door. Fidelia swallowed. If the constables found them here, they'd be jailed and hanged. They had to get out now. Go, Merrick commanded. Just to see Hat-on the Jewel, back in the tropics. But, Bloody Al started, and Merrick coughed in her direction, cutting her off. No goodbyes, he said. You've saved me enough times. Let me save you. He reached for breath and managed to choke it out. Best mates. And Fidelia felt her chest bulge, threatening to split. Bloody Al opened her mouth, but whatever she was going to say stayed a secret. Instead, the two pirates traced their hands on their hearts, turned, and slipped out of Bon Bon Voyage's sweet shop and into the night. Fidelia looked around her. The candy store was a devastation of sugar and sprinkles and fallen shelves. Aunt Julia huddled in the corner, arms wrapped around her middle as if to keep from falling apart. Merrick pulled her to standing, his breath rattling, and walked right to Aunt Julia. He seized the librarian's face with both of his vein-riddled hands. Just as Fidelia cried out, ready to rush her aunt's side, Merrick kissed her, and then he collapsed. Chapter 30. Bon Bon Voyage sweet shop was silent but for the crash of the waves in the bay, and the splatter of rain, and the winds mourning through the broken glass of the front window. And Merrick's pocket watch, spilling from his trouser pocket, its ticks the loudest sound to Fidelia as she stared, unblinking. Merrick's body lay in a crumpled heap beneath Aunt Julia. He coughed. Blood sprayed from his mouth and onto the black of white tiles, a morbid red rain. Then he was still. Merrick, Aunt Julia said softly, falling to her knees. Fidelia held her breath. For an uncomfortably long time, there was quiet. But Merrick stirred and twisted his body around so he lay flat on his back. He coughed. Jewel, he said. Jewel. Fidelia's heart thumped so hard she thought it might jet out of her chest and onto the floor next to the captain. You know him? She said to her aunt. I know him, Aunt Julia said. I know him very well. She pulled Merrick's head onto her lap, running a hand along his grimy black hair. Is this true? Is it the red daisies? It's death, Merrick growled. Not so pretty, is it? Aunt Julia took off her chiffon scarf and used it to wipe the blood around his mouth. Her jellyfish scar, the one on her neck, was an iridescent lilac in the storm's light. Suddenly, Fidelia felt things click into place. A radar scan, complete. The library book back at Medusa's. She looked at Aunt Julia. That was yours. You took her to the grotto? Aunt Julia balked. Merrick opened his mouth to speak, then burst into coughs, and they rolled out of him without mercy, one right after another, wave after wave, unrelenting peaks. Over Aunt Julia's shoulder, Fidelia stared. Merrick's face was white, his mismatched eyes both retreating into his skull. The black and red eye was raw, bloated, a full blood moon, its shiny film the only thing holding it together. He sucked in air with his colorless lips, which were shriveled like dried bait worms. It's done, Jewel, he grunted. I'm open market on the maggot buffet. With each breath Merrick took, his lungs squeezed, the air rattling. It took him forever between inhales, but he somehow summoned the strength to keep breathing and to open his hand. There, resting in his palm, like it had always been there, was the tarnished pewter brooch. Aunt Julia's pale gray eyes grew. For a woman whose livelihood was words, she seemed to struggle to find any. But I threw this into the cave, she finally said. This was supposed to be gone forever. Merrick smoothed the brooch with the tip of his thumb, skimming the scalloped edge. Now it's back. How on earth did you... Again, Aunt Julia fished for words, turning the brooch over and over until the realization washed over her. Oh, Merrick, no. She removed her peach glasses, which were beginning to fog. You went into the cave to get this back for me. The wind blew sideways, sending a drizzle of chilly rain through the broken store window. Merrick coughed, then took Aunt Julia's hand. I would do anything for you, Jewel. Jewel. The word pulsed in Fidelia's ears. The name carved into Medusa's grotto. The ones on the wall. Merrick plus Jewel. Merrick loved Julia so much he named his ship after her. That's not true, Aunt Julia narrowed her eyes. You wouldn't stop your pirating. She considered their interlaced fingers, her nostrils flaring with some old rage. Nothing could have convinced you to give it up. Not the law, not death, not even me. We are who we are. Haven't your books taught you as much? Aunt Julia sniffled. If we are who we are, she said, then you're a damn fool. The pirate coughed. I gave up my life when I gave up you. I wanted you to know that before it was too late. He shook his head. You're right. I am a fool who never stopped loving you. A sound came out of Aunt Julia's throat, visceral, a howl. And I never stopped loving you. Merrick lifted his pocket watch from his pocket, and the three of them listened to its ticks, the clicks of time passing. Aunt Julia kissed his cheek, kissed his forehead, kissed the sharpness of his jaw. She combed her fingers through his hair, her tears falling onto his head like anointments. He nestled into her lap and closed his blue eye, content to spend the last ticking seconds here, just touching her, breathing the same air as her. Fidelia knew she should look away, give Merrick and her aunt privacy during this intimate moment, but she couldn't. She watched this outlawed pirates every second, until finally, horribly, he stiffened, gasping. "This is it," Merrick whispered, every word a labor. "I can feel it. I'm out of time." Aunt Julia kissed him again, clutching the brooch to her heart. "I will never forget you," she whispered, and gently leaned his head back. Merrick's blue eyes flooded white. He flailed, disoriented. "Jewel," he coughed one last time, and then Merrick the monstrous, the terror of the 9 seas, was done. The words were there, on the tip of Fidelia's tongue. "I'm sorry." The words that everyone says in moments like this. But she held them back, swallowed them down, and cleared her throat. With a shudder, she sang the 3 notes of Cheap Shot Charlie's morning song, the one he had crooned when the Jewel had passed the Quarrel of the Damned. Aunt Julia, with Merrick's head on her lap, turned to her niece with watery red-rimmed eyes, and listened. Fidelia was no singer, but she warbled out the 3 notes, and she concentrated on making them as strong and clear as Charlie's had been on the ship. She sang for Merrick, and she sang for Julia, and she sang for her parents. She sang for herself, this simple 3-tone dirge the only thing that brought her peace. The rain dried, night lifted from black to a hazy blue as the undertow melted away. A few stars winked. Through it all, Fidelia still sang those 3 droning notes, until her voice croaked and gave out and Aunt Julia ran out of tears, and Merrick's pocket watch still ticked, in time to the waves. The tide rushed in, the tide rushed out, and Arberley Bay was calm, until the next storm. 10 years earlier. Julia sat on the boardwalk, a book propped open in her lap. She turned the page and closed her eyes, letting the thin sunshine warm her face. The heady exhale of a blush-pink apple blossom mixed with the salty scent of the sea, the smells of springtime. A strand of hair fell from her tight bun. She let it dance across her cheek, tickling her skin. Behind her, the pub was a symphony of noise and laughter and music. Before her, Stony Beach was also alive, families picnicking, children huddling around the tide pools, dogs paddling joyously in the chilly surf. But Julia had a book in her hands, and so she didn't notice anything else. Nothing but the words on the page and the sun on her skin. A new batch of books was due any hour, a set of almanacs that had to be stamped, bound, catalogued, and shelved. She was here to watch for the Jolly Dodger, the merchant ship that delivered library goods from the mainland. It had been a particularly long winter. The undertow made hostages of all the islanders, but spring had finally begun its slow crawl to consciousness after its long hibernation. To Julia's eyes, the sky had never been so perfectly blue. The ships sailed into the harbor, their crews leaping onto the docks to tie them off. All of them familiar vessels, familiar beams, familiar banners flapping from the masts. Julia barely glanced up from her book to watch them arrive, until a lone ship, anchored in the shallows of the bay, caught her attention. A strange ship. She straightened her glasses, straining to see the ship's name, but its stern was clean of script. A no-name ship. She frowned. The ship wasn't flying a flag either. A movement near the ship's waterline. The ship's longboat was rowing ashore. A tall, bald man with dark skin and thick arms pulled the oars, and a second man knelt at the boat's bow. A man with a sharp jaw and black hair absorbed the sunlight like cinders. Even with the distance, Julia could feel the eyes of the black-haired man on her. She blushed, finding the loose lock of her hair and tucking it safely back. Her book slid down her lap, her fingers losing her spot on its pages. As the longboat drifted closer, she could distinguish the man's face, young with oiled sideburns and a pair of moonstone eyes, sunken and piercing as the spring's rays. The back of her neck prickled. She tried to breathe in the sweet smell of the apple blossoms to clear her mind, but found it difficult to operate her lungs. Then the man winked at her, and her heart suddenly galloped. She strode away from the railing, then slipped through the welcoming door of the candy store. Once inside Bon Bon Voyage sweet shop, her heart tamed itself back to a nice, even pace. She tucked her book under her arm and walked straight to the chocolate aisle. She'd stay in here for a few minutes, give the man in the longboat time to dock and vanish into the port, and then she'd go back to the library and wait for her shipment there. There was plenty to do until the almanacs arrived, plenty of work. Bells jangled as the door of the sweet shop opened and closed. She chose a brick of black chocolate and inspected its label. "Will have you swooning at first bite," someone behind her read aloud. "The darkest chocolate available in Her Majesty's kingdom, made from pure grade cocoa beans, the blackest on the island." She knew, the way she could often predict the endings of her books, that it was him. Yes, when she turned around, it was the man from the longboat, and she had to remind herself to stay standing, keep breathing, keep living. Up close, she could see the details of his face, skin that had been battered by wind, burned by sun, chilled by Arctic air, the skin of a sailor. A garden of whiskers grew along that knife of a jawline, and his blue eyes twinkled, as if concealing a secret. He took the brick of chocolate from her, one of his calloused fingers brushing her pinky. "The salt-spiked, bitter taste of this bar is an exotic, sensuous experience." His eyebrows danced. "You're a fan?" Once, Julia had read a book about a mermaid who was brought onto dry land during a full moon and melted into a puddle of seawater on a fisherman's kitchen floor. If only. Hardly. She adjusted her glasses and jutted her nose into the air. The librarian's signal that all conversation should cease. "Is that you, Miss Julia?" The elderly owner of Bon Bon Voyage sweet shop stopped arranging a bouquet of buttery carnations and leaned over the counter. "Why, weren't you just here to stock up yesterday?" "No." Her response came out a bit louder than she wanted, then resounded in her now hollow mind, sounding more and more ridiculous with every echo. The man grinned. Was he laughing at her? "Julia, is it?" She didn't move. "Merrick von Morn," he said, offering his hand. "Merrick of the good ship," she prompted. Well, we're all still getting acquainted with our ship," he said. "This is her inaugural voyage." "Well, nothing more suspicious than an unnamed ship," Julia said, "except maybe a ship with no flag." "Then I'd better have my men pick up a flag at the warehouse," Merrick said. "We wouldn't want to attract the wrong sort of attention." He pointed at the book under her arm. "So, work or pleasure?" Julia held the spine so he could see the title, Library Trends and Research. He raised his eyebrows. "So, pleasure," he said. "I'm staff librarian at Arverley Library," she clarified. "Well," he said, "then perhaps you can help me." He finally broke eye contact with her and scanned the racks of candy around them. "We've just stopped at the chandler's to pick up a few things, tar and line and such. Then we hit the cocoa route, along with every other sea dog in the kingdom. It'd be nice to bring something aboard besides jerky and eggs." "So what would you recommend as an expert researcher? Besides the sensuous chocolate, I mean." Julia straightened, willing her face not to turn pink. This man, she surmised, had decided she was the butt of some joke and likely wouldn't let her alone until she'd provided the punchline. She led him through the aisles, stacking the sweets onto his open arms. Apple crin truffles, Kaleido rainbow figs, astro bloomers, and, for good measure, a bar of the sensuous black chocolate. "There," she said when they reached the counter, "a sampling of Arberley's finest." No sooner had she finished her words when someone outside shouted, "Pirates! At the warehouse!" A line of constables ran past the window of Bon Bon Voyage sweet shop, their black trench coats streaming behind them. Cries of, "Call the Navy!" could be tracked all the way down the boardwalk to the chandler's warehouse. "Pirates," Julia muttered. "They should all be hanged." "Indeed," Merrick said, wrestling through his pockets for the green notes to pay for his sweets. The sweet shop door jangled. A tall, dark man popped his head in the doorway, a bead of sweat rolling from the top of his bald head down the length of his face. The man from the longboat, the man who had rowed Merrick ashore. "Time to go, Captain," he said, panting. "They're calling in reinforcements." Julia's stomach twisted. She suddenly noticed the piercing in the bald man's nose, the scars along his knuckles, the pistol in his belt, visible through the rips in his tunic. Pirates. She gazed at the raven-haired man next to her with new alarm. A pirate, and she had been chattering with him as if he were just another library patron. "I'll meet you at the gate," Merrick said to the man. "Get her ready." The bald man left, and Merrick counted out exact change for his pile of sweets. Why bother paying for it? Julia was surprised by her own boldness. Certainly Merrick had his own pistol beneath his overcoat and wouldn't hesitate to punish her for her lip. But something about the man made a flame flicker in her chest, made her words spill out without thinking. But he gave her a crooked half-smile. "You like me." Julia pursed her lips, but inside the flame blazed. "Like you," she repeated, incredulous. "You're a pirate, a scallywag." "So what?" Merrick said. "You're a librarian, a common book pusher." He handed her the bar of black chocolate. "You don't hear me complaining." Outside, the squabble got louder. Constables had swarmed the warehouse and were taking canal boats to the bay, where Merrick's ship prepared for departure. Someone fired a cannon. "I'm afraid that's my cue." Merrick swept the pile of sweets into the pocket of his overcoat and nodded at her. "We'll see each other again." Julia folded her arms, gripping the chocolate bar tightly. "What makes you think I have any interest in—" "Because," Merrick said, leaning so close that she thought for an insane second that he might actually kiss her, and that she might actually let him. "Because I saw you. I saw you reading, and I saw you ignore everything else around you. A sailor stumbled out of the pub and tossed his cookies 3 feet away from you. Did you know? A rogue dog sniffed at your skirts. A fishmonger and a housewife nearly got into a fist fight over the price of shrimp. Right within your earshot, and you ignored everything." Julia was certain he could see her pulse in her neck, hammering away. "You ignored everything in the whole damned world, until you saw me." She swallowed. Merrick opened the door, but turned back. "We'll be coming through here again in 2 weeks," he said. "I'm sure you'll be out of chocolate by then. Perhaps I could bring you some? I'll be stopping in Kankias for the night. They have this fig-infused black drinking chocolate." Another cannon fired, followed by the crunch of wood. Merrick saluted her with a devastating smirk. "Goodbye, Miss Julia." And with the jingle of the bells on the door, he dashed away. Julia stood there, chocolate brick in hand, listening to the gunshots and the cannons, listening to the constable's frustrated shouts when Merrick's ship got away, listening to the silence that made her smile, because it meant he'd gotten away. "Goodbye, scallywag," she said quietly, and nibbled the corner of the chocolate, swooning. The Jolly Dodger had arrived in the harbor. Its captain was pacing the docks, searching for the librarian. Julia apologized for her tardiness and escorted him to the canal, where he loaded the shipment of almanacs into a boat. "I'll be sending for another order tonight," she informed him as she stepped down into the canal boat. "An urgent order." "Oh?" the captain said. Usually library shipments were months apart. "Yes," she said. "I'll need it here in exactly 2 weeks' time. We must learn nature's strange waltz, rising and falling by its cues. When our time comes to leave the floor, rather than trying to prolong the music, we must gracefully take our exit, and know that even after we've left, the dance goes on." Exploring an Underwater Fairyland by Dr. and Dr. Quayle. Today, March 20th, first day of spring, first day of shark season. The tropics are somehow even brighter today, and life beneath the sea is teeming. From the trawler I can see a school of bluefin weaving in and out of the reef. A few eels have poked their snouts out, catching some of the rays. It's as if they all know it's a beautiful day, and that we're all lucky to be alive, and that we're out celebrating. Let's hope even the biggest fish feels like frolicking too. I'm jotting all of this down as Aunt Julia steers the boat, so forgive my sloppy handwriting. I want to be sure to get every detail down exactly as it happened today. Here, Aunt Julia said, this is the spot. I slowed the new trawler, and she stopped immediately. At 10 feet, it's not as big as the platypus. But we got her at a great price, and I rebuilt her engine myself. We've dubbed her the Choco Glomp, the perfect name, since she's painted deep brown and has rounded sides. Beneath the sheen of turquoise, Aunt Julia and I both saw it, a black hole far beneath the waves, blurred but still terrifying, like a mouth gaping from the sea bottom. But we weren't there for the cave or for Merrick. Today, we were there for me. I pulled the new and improved water eater from my rucksack. I still use parrot feather leaves for filtration, but now they have their own removable compartment. I've also shortened the chambers and made the mouthpiece more comfortable. I'd given the latest version a short test run in the shallows of Arberley Bay, but it was time for an extended experimental dive. Aunt Julia pulled out the sack of plastic tags and placed one in my track gaff, and a couple extra tags on the belt of my dress, just in case. I secured the water eater and diving mask over my head, then tipped myself backward into the water. It's only a hair cooler than the scorching air, but it felt delicious after sailing through the sticky, muggy islands of the tropics. How different everything looked. How much crisper, bluer, more beautiful now that I wasn't viewing it through the lens of fear. My time with the pirates still feels like a dream, but it's long over. No more Merrick the Monstrous, yes, and no more Mulvanian pirates, or stale old candy for sustenance, or Navy blockades. No more treasure. No more Cheap Shot Charlie or Bloody L either. We haven't heard from them since the night Merrick died. Just as well, Aunt Julia keeps saying, but I can see the sadness in her eyes when she thinks of them, when she thinks of her old secret life. I expect they've moved on to better things, she says, and I hope she's right. Here is what we know happened the night Merrick died. Just the facts. The Mulvanian pirates took control of the mother dog. The element of surprise was on their side, but so was the storm. The flagship was moored in the shallows, and the undertow's strong, senseless, chaotic current towed the ship out to sea, tugging and straining the lines and sails. Its officers were too busy keeping the decks from flooding to be ready for the tiny Mulvanian crew of 5, who simply climbed aboard and took over the ship with their guns. Another fact. The Admiral reached the mother dog in a dory, and shots were fired from both sides. It was too dark and rainy for any of us in the sweet shop to make out exactly what was transpiring. But here's another fact. The mother dog was suddenly cast off. Whether it was deliberate on NICU's part, or whether the Admiral himself cut the ropes, or maybe the storm itself snapped the anchor line. The ship drifted out to the bay. A giant wave curled above the ship and froze. The last image anyone had of the mother dog, or of NICU and his prelipes, or of Admiral Bridgewater, was the galleon's massive outline, silhouetted in a flash of white lightning. There was the ship, the wave above it, and then darkness. And then there was nothing but the anarchy of the storm. One final fact. Bits of driftwood were found over the following days on the pebbles of Stony Beach. A few scraps still bore faint gilded lettering, but the sea salt had scrubbed out anything decipherable. The largest pieces were of the finest quality lumber, live oak, polished to the very definition of smoothness, Navy standard trim. The treasure is gone, and both Aunt Julia and I think that's for the best. Now the stories of Merrick's legendary treasure can live on forever. But back to the dive. The water eater worked marvelously. I filled my lungs with air and blew bubbles out my nose as I dove deeper in the water. There was the mouth of the cave. I loomed closer and tried to peek inside, but it was only darkness. It won't be there forever, I mark. Sooner or later, the undertow's tides will force water into the cave and bury the red daisies forever, and the world will forget that it ever existed, except in the tall tales of sailors. Just like the treasure, I think some things are better left to stories. Just as I reached the carpet of algae at the sea bottom, a familiar shape enclosed me in shadow. The shadow I'd been waiting for. I looked up, and there he was, Grizzle. He circled the reef, his caudal fins straight as canvas sails on a schooner, his mouth agape. This was my third time seeing him in front of me, and of course, I've dreamed of him for months, but my reaction is the same every time. Scared and quiet and fizzling with joy, right under my ribs. How could sharks not be my favorite? The hollow spot beneath the coral is empty now, I could see. His little baby grizzlings have grown and left the nursery. Mom and Dad acquired very little knowledge about sharks' reproductive cycles, but they did discover a few things. Sharks don't mate for life. They are ovoviviparous, meaning they grow eggs internally, which hatch inside the mothers and are born live. The shark pups stay with their parents for a short time, maybe a few weeks, and then they say goodbye forever and leave. No joyous return, like for baby sea turtles who fight their way through the terrors of the sea back to their homes. No family reunions, like for the colonies of Arctic seals up north. It was a splintering. That meant Grizzle was now alone, his children out in the world without him, without his protection. I think of the scars that inspired Grizzle's nickname, and I hope that his offspring will be all right. He approached me with caution. I wonder if he could remember me. My heart steadied, the track gaff in my hands. As he circled past, I raised my track gaff and smoothly, carefully tagged his fin. There. Quail, number 314, the tag said. I stayed just long enough to watch Grizzle cruise away from the reef until he was just a silhouette in the turquoise water, a torpedo, a submarine, a vestige, a memory. Then I surfaced and climbed back into the choco glomp. Aunt Julia was flipping through Adventures in Science Engineering. My hydroscanner is on the cover of this month's issue. The patent office still wasn't keen on patenting any of my doodads, but luckily for me, a certain librarian researched the ins and outs of patent law, and now anyone who wants one can buy their own hydroscanner and find their own Grizzle. Well, Aunt Julia said, and I spat out the water eater's mouthpiece. Got him, I said. After I dried myself off, I wrote down his number. Tag 314, Quail Shark. Aunt Julia smiled. You finally settled on an official name. I like it. I flipped through my pages and studied the sketch I made of Grizzle last fall, on that last day of shark season, the night I thought I'd lost everything. Will that be a scientific name too? Aunt Julia asked. Carcharodon coturnix? I shook my head and ran my fingers along the drawing of his teeth, spectacular triangles of death, a ragged grin. A beam of light hit my glasses and I squinted. Sunshine reflected off the brooch pinned on Aunt Julia's collar, a pewter brooch, tarnished, the color of shadow. Monstrum magnificus, I proclaimed. Magnificent monster. We'll see if he shows up in Arberley this summer for another taste of our local halibut, which he loved so much last year. Or maybe he'll make a round-the-world excursion, same as us. Aunt Julia and I are heading to Crabmore Shore as I write this, to watch the migration of the crabs. After that, to Mulvania to gather seagrass. After that, who knows? Maybe Conchias to see their famous lagoons. Back when my parents were alive, I thought I knew the world. I thought I had traveled its edges, seen every speck of it, knew every creature that inhabited it. I hadn't even come close. There are probably monsters even bigger than him somewhere, swimming the deepest, blackest reaches of the sea. The world is bigger than I can imagine. I know that now, and I'm ready to see it all. And that is the end of Race to the Bottom of the Sea. I hope you guys enjoyed this book as much as I did. Thank you so much for joining me this summer with Reading Buddy Book Club. I will see you guys around the library, and have a great rest of your summer. Bye!